Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me today. It's an absolute honor. Thank you, IIFT. I usually don't like talking at all. I'm usually behind a keyboard or a piano um, and sort of conducting or playing with a big ensemble. But well, today I'm here talking for all of you, but there will be some music, fortunately for me and for you, because after a point, I don't know what I'll say. I think when I look back 23 years back, which is when things started for me, when I was 5.5 years old. Um, that is when my journey began as a musician. I was one summer I was sitting and playing around with my grandfather's harmonium, and I was too small to play around with the keys and the bellow, and I had no idea what I was doing. It was like a toy for me. So I asked him to press the bellow, and I was just playing around with the keys. And that summer, I think my parents and my family realized that he seems to be able to play a tune without knowing what he's doing. And because there is music in the family, there always was, there might be something inkling here. And that's when my formal training, the idea of getting formally trained as a pianist, began. Um, 23 years back in Western classical music. It's been a very interesting journey um, of s- reflection, self doubt, rediscovery. Um, because I began training as a Western classical pianist, gave my um, all all your grades from Trinity College London, from ABRSM London, and eventually I started leaning towards a very different sound, which I would like to call hybrid. I won't call it fusion, as a lot of people call it fusion. I like calling it a very hybrid space as a pianist, as a composer. From a very pro Western classical space to a very, um, I think, cross genre, cross world music space, which I feel has happened also because I was heavily drawn to Indian classical music around when I was in class 8, and I feel like it was coming to me gradually because I was Indian classical music has always been in my family. It's come from my grandfather who was, apart from being a very senior lawyer in the Allahabad High Court, he's also a very respectable classical musician. So I think it was just about time when that influence of Hindustani classical would hit me at the right time. I wasn't emotionally ready till a certain period, and then at one point it hit me like a bullet, where I got drawn onto it, and I've been inspired by it ever since. And so even though when I'm teaching and if I'm mentoring someone as a student of piano, I will start with Western classical. However, I think the way I teach or the way I'm talking to them changes, and very often I'm criticized for it. You're teaching them Western classical, but you're talking from a very world music perspective. And okay, the word perspective you'll hear a lot because I love that word. It's also why we named the first album Perspectives. Um, back to what I was saying. So a lot of my students are often given that world music perspective while learning Western classical music. And I think it makes it very interesting to explore that space. So as I was finishing my school, getting into Delhi University, I think I was very lucky to be in DU at the time because I got to explore a diverse set of musicians, friends, individuals who come from all kinds of backgrounds, and that helps you to really diversify the kind of people you're interacting with. And that's really influenced the way I've approached and how I look at the arts. Because for me now, the arts are just not a genre or not just a discipline. It's more like it's a community which I feel has come together and needs to come together even more to present itself to become stronger as a unit. So when I was finishing my college in at Hansraj, is where I realized that I want to produce an album which is in a very collaborative space, and I love the collaborative energy. Now that thought stopped there, and then my masters began at Ambedkar University, and I never thought that I'll be um, so interestingly sort of drawn towards an academic course, because I was doing my master's in performance studies, which sounds like it's performance, but it's not performance at all. It's an academic take, and I think too much of an academic take on theater and performance. Um, but interestingly, that is where my ensemble, The Collective, was born as a research paper. Also, my master's dissertation was our first album, Perspectives, second time now in my talk. And from there, during my master's in performance studies, I was exploring the idea of the collective and how the collective has a very dynamic energy to it. The sound of the collective, the thought of the collective, the basic concept behind working in a collective is your energy and the other's energy coming together to form one. And that could be the other could be one person. In our case now is 200 people, which is the collective right now. And over time, what became interesting is that I started exploring music with artists from across India, pan India, from um, people who I would never think I would collaborate with. And I've always been drawn towards Indian classical music in a certain way. So I perceived, and I've always explored Indian classical music from a Western classical lens, because I've been trained as a pianist. So naturally, I draw towards it from a harmonic, from a contemporary lens. I always wanted listeners to be as excited about classical music the way I was when I listened to a piece of. Very often, people talk about how it has a niche audience and people get intimidated by the art form. But I've always been very excited towards how the emotional energy that it gives out, and I always wanted um, people to witness and feel that energy coming from music of India, which is traditional, whether it's folk or it's classical. And that's how the collective was born. And I think over time, even though I'm a pianist by heart, I don't see myself by any long shot as one of the amongst the top or the best pianists that this country is currently producing or has produced. But I see myself trying to form a community of artists, or trying to build a community of the arts where we can try and where we find a sustainable model to sort of help the arts grow in a way where artists are doing work with artists and with other say brands, where you can grow as a unit, as an art, as a community of art, and which is what currently I am trying to uh, find myself towards. So, as an educator, as a producer, as a composer, I think I see myself having a responsibility where you want to try and help a community grow, and that is where I think I see myself constantly growing. Unfortunately, I've had gurus who have pushed me throughout. Interestingly, all my gurus have been purists, whether it was my Hindustani classical guru or my teacher who was teaching me piano, purists. However, when it came to my learning and my growth, they said, don't limit yourself to one genre, because somehow the multi-genre, the cross-genre situation really helps you to bring out your personality as a whole. So don't do just Western classical, don't do Indian classical. You find a cross and a midpoint wherein both these families, both these genres, the cultures aren't really being compromised, yet both the energies are sort of enhancing each other. And I think over time, that is something that has stayed with me, and that pushes me. And I think that also helps me to criticize myself, because very often I have to let go of a lot of ideas, because if something feels that I'm doing something for the heck of it, which happens a lot, I have to drop that idea right there, because if I don't do that, then I get drawn into this trap of fusion, which is not what the intention behind doing this in the first place was. And I think that journey has just begun, and I think there's a long, long way to go. Whereas to find a space where you're pushing the arts, you're pushing yourself, and you're trying to promote traditional Indian music to a contemporary audience so that it doesn't die out, yet it's being explored and re-explored. And that constant flow of the archive and the repertoire is, that flow is, that cycle carries on. And yes, so I think when I was asked to give this talk, I was thinking, how do I bring in the idea of mirror, mirror into this? And I think because this entire art form is so self-reflective and you have to keep reflecting upon your ethics and your art and how you're presenting and what you're thinking, and question yourself every day as to what you're doing, why you're doing it. So I thought this is me and how I'll bring my thought into mirror, mirror to today's talk. Thank you.